There seems to be so much confusion about the new .NET 8 Blazor template and its features. I must admit, at first I was very confused as well, to the extent that I thought I had to rethink my entire approach to building Blazor projects. Luckily, that's not the case. Among many other things, the .NET team and some YouTubers try to showcase the new options, the new possibilities with Blazor. So the next time you think about starting a new MVC project, a Razor project, or any older type of project, you might consider Blazor instead. If you are already working with Blazor in .NET 3, 6 or 7, whether it's the Blazor Server application using those WebSockets for interactivity, or if you were working with the client-side Blazor WebAssembly project, that's all just still possible in .NET 8. You can even just start a new standalone WebAssembly or standalone server application and just work as you're used to. There's gonna be some changes, of course, maybe in the folder structure and the program CS, some minor things. So that's what you see on this screenshot. I cut this out just running .NET new list to see all of the templates. Just cut these out that have Blazor. So you can still just create a Blazor Server app that's gonna have those WebSockets for interactivity, or you could just choose for the standalone WebAssembly app that's just going to be the Blazor WebAssembly client-side project. What is new and is entirely optional is this Blazor Web App template, which have those interactivity types. Let's say you only select the interactive server, then that's going to resemble a standalone Blazor Server app. Let's say you select WebAssembly, interactive WebAssembly or interactive auto, then you're probably going to get a combination of the Blazor Server app plus the Blazor WebAssembly app, with pre-rendering enabled by default. And that pre-rendering is probably a good reason to choose this app template instead of first creating the Blazor Server app and then creating the Blazor WebAssembly app and then making sure that the Blazor Server app can serve the Blazor WebAssembly, and then everything is pre-rendered and so on. You now just get that out of the box with the Blazor Web App template. So if you need some combination of the Blazor Server app and the Blazor WebAssembly app, then the Blazor Web App might be a good solution for you. So for pre-rendering, that means having the awesome interactivity of a Blazor WebAssembly client-side app, but also getting good SEO from the pre-rendering capabilities that are included in the Blazor Server app. Let's take a look at that and create a new project, a Blazor. I don't see the Blazor Server templates in the list anymore, so I assume if you take the Blazor Web App and then you don't choose the WebAssembly interactivity, then you're just going to get an interactive Blazor Server app. So that should be the same as the Blazor Server app standalone. Of course, I'm not using Visual Studio, so maybe in Visual Studio, or if you're using the command line like I just showed you, maybe then you can still use the standalone Blazor Server application. Let's have a look. So that's this Blazor template. If I wanted only the client-side WebAssembly application, then I can still choose the WebAssembly standalone application, and that's that Blazor WASM template. So that's not going to include any server-side stuff. No, just one project, one client-side project. The web app, if you're using Visual Studio, you might select the interactivity types. You can choose from interactive server, interactive WebAssembly, or interactive auto. And that's Interactive Auto and Interactive WebAssembly will generate two projects, one server, one client. And then if you only select the server interactivity, you're probably only going to get one application, Blazor Server. So let's take a look at that. Of course, the structure changed a bit. But if we take a look at, let's see, the app, then in here you have routes. That's basically the route of your app where everything is going to be rendered. And here you can specify render mode and then say equals at render mode dot interactive auto, interactive server, or interactive WebAssembly. So if you leave that out, that render mode, then everything is just going to be static. There's going to be no interactivity. So if you have buttons with the on click, then nothing is going to happen. So for this counter, this on click event is not going to fire. For that, you need to enable interactivity. You even see it here at the top. Here, render mode interactive server is enabled. So that means, just like the Blazor server, the WebSockets will take care of updating the component, the UI, whenever that button is clicked, whenever the state changes. If I remove this one, then that button wouldn't do anything because that on click needs is something interactive. So that's just not gonna do anything. So that's pretty clever that they included that at the top, because for a moment I thought, oh, I'm not getting a Blazor server project, not with the WebSockets at least. I thought I was just getting a static application. So without these render modes, you can actually compare this project to a Razor Pages project that also can't leverage that interactivity. Only in this project, like I just showed you, you can leverage this interactivity either on component level, so you can say, okay, the counter needs interactivity, and maybe the error page doesn't have any interactivity because nothing really happens, it's just showcasing things. The home, the same thing. The weather has stream rendering. That's a different beast. And that's stream rendering is only possible in the server-side applications. So if you were to pick a client-side WebAssembly application, you're not going to be able to use this. So that's just an extra option. You don't have to use it, you can use it. You could also just have set the interactive server here. I'm not going to deep dive into the stream rendering. That's basically just going to serve some skeleton layout. And then when the actual data got fetched, then that gets filled up. So that's just to give the user an idea that something is happening. But maybe instead of a loader icon, then you see like the outline of the page. I think that's more like a nice to have than a must have. But feel free to play around with that. If you want your app to appear a bit quicker or things like that, then you can play around with these render modes, but it's not required. You can still continue as you were. So if you just want a normal Blazor server application with the WebSockets, then you just delete all of these things, or you just go for the empty template. Then you don't have to delete anything. Let's say all of these. So you can set the render mode on component level individually, but you don't, if you're not going to use that, if you don't have the need for some components to render this way and other components to have that kind of rendering, then just don't bother with it. It's optional. So if you just want a plain Blazor Server application with those WebSockets for interactivity, then you can specify that on the routes component. And now that's going to be applicable for all of your components. And you can also set it on the head outlet. That just means if you switch from one page to another, then your metadata tags are going to be updated and so on. I can prove to you that that is what it does because I have this blog and I didn't, so it's still, my title is still home, keep it simple stupid. So I switched pages, but it didn't really take the page title of the blog page. That's because I forgot to add that interactivity to my head outlet. So that's just a good thing to know. But the most important is that you just specify that on your routes component. And maybe after a long time you decide, oh, I don't actually need those WebSockets. I'm good with a Blazor WebAssembly client. I don't really care about SEO or accessing the database directly, concerns like that. Then you might maybe just say, oh, okay, let's just change that to interactive WebAssembly. Then this one as well, maybe. But of course, it's not that simple. You might have to change some things up in here. This routes razor maybe has to be named host.razor, and then this routes is going to be app. Yeah, some small things like that. Your project packages will, or yeah, at least your program, you're gonna have to add interactive WebAssembly instead of server, and so on. So let's say you've been working for some time in a project and you suddenly have that need to switch to the other render mode, then you could do that. So I just created a Blazor WebAssembly client project, just a standalone one, just the client side. You can just do that, new solution, Blazor WebAssembly standalone, which is just the Blazor WASM template in the terminal. And if you do that, you just, as it says, you just get that Blazor WebAssembly client project. You don't need to worry about any WebSocket stuff because this one does not use that to update to have that interactivity. That's just that very interactive Blazor application. One thing it does not really have is that good SEO. So the search engine optimization in Google. So you're not really going to have, if you check the page source of such an application, you're not going to get the contents of the page visible. So Google cannot index these pages, cannot really use that to improve your visibility or ranking. And that's when you might want to choose a combination of projects. So have that pre-rendering of the server side and then the interactivity of the client side. So, and then you have a setup, like you have a server project and a client project. That's what you're going to get if you select interactive WebAssembly or interactive auto. And the server project barely contains anything. Just program CS, and I added some static files in the www root, and that's about it. And all it does really is add interactive WebAssembly components, and at the bottom add interactive WebAssembly render mode. That's all it does, and that makes sure that will do the first serve of my Blazor client project. So this host is actually the host razor of the client project. So all this server project does is the first serve of that project. So if I refresh this page, then you first see what the server gives us, and then later the WebAssembly kicks in. Why I do that, of course, is to get that nice pre-rendering that improves the SEO, which is very important if you're writing blog posts or you want to be easily discovered. So you saw the server, nothing special. And let's take a look at the host, which used to be the index HTML or the project we saw before, that was the routes.razor. So, and then instead of the routes tag as the main thing, you now have the app tag with the render mode of interactive WebAssembly. And that's all I need. I don't need to. I can, optionally, if I want to, play around with other interactivity modes, but actually I don't really need it. So we can just still use the pre-rendering as we were used to before. Only before we kind of had to first create the server project ourselves, then create the client project ourselves, then make sure that the server project knows about the client project to serve it. Now you can kind of get that out of the box with that new Blazor Web App template. So now optionally I could add some components in the server project. Maybe I want some things to be rendered statically. Or maybe I want to play around with that stream rendering. That's gonna have to be in the server project. In this setup, it doesn't really make sense to use the interactive server mode because, yeah, we have the nice interactivity of the Blazor WebAssembly. So that's not really beneficial. But maybe in some cases, we need to do something very sensitive, like access the database with our connection string or whatever. If it's something sensitive, we'll likely don't want to do that in the client project. We might want to keep that in the server side. So maybe that's a possibility to then keep that in the server project. That's what the .NET team wanted to show you and tell you, that there are all these options for all these different use cases and needs. So they're just planting a seed that next time you choose for a certain project type, that you might want to go for Blazor by default, not think about the Razor Pages or MVC anymore. And if you want a setup that can leverage a bit of the server side applications with the WebSockets, the stream rendering or the static rendering, and you also want to leverage some of the Blazor WebAssembly project, then you can go for that combined setup. So with the Blazor project and a client setup, and then entirely modify that to your needs. Play around with the render modes, but that's still entirely optional. If you just want a Blazor server app, you can still do that. If you just want a Blazor client app, you can still do that as well. And the interactive auto render mode from Blazor is basically, it can choose between using the WebSockets or using the WebAssembly, and that choice depends on the web app visitor. At the first visit, maybe they don't have the necessary things installed on their browser or on their computer to run the WebAssembly, to leverage those WebAssembly capabilities. Then the server project is just gonna use the WebSockets for that, and the runtime that lives on the server project to run everything. And then once the necessary things are downloaded to run that, to leverage that WebAssembly, then that might take over for the rendering and the interactivity. It might also make a decision based on your connection speed, if I'm not mistaken. And then maybe the next app visit for that user, it's gonna go straight to the WebAssembly because all the requirements are met for that user to just use the WebAssembly. So that's basically the auto mode, and for that you'll get 2 projects by default, so the server and the client, that are going to work together. So why I made this video is because I saw a lot of confusion in the comment sections on these videos, and honestly on the first video I saw, I was very confused as well. So I do my best to give an explanation because I'm no longer confused about these things. I try to put people at ease, and I write long comments, but I saw some got deleted by the author of the video, and honestly I was very confused the first time as well, because I thought, oh no, I have to, everything that's not interactive, I'm gonna have to move that to the server project, and everything that is interactive, I'm gonna have to keep that in the client project. So that's going to be only the buttons because they have that on click, and then maybe the forms in general, and maybe some other components, but then all the rest of the page is gonna have to live in the server project, and how is that going to work together? And I was very confused at that time, and I thought, oh, I'm using Blazor class libraries, do I now also have to make a split in there between the server and the client? I almost thought I had to do some kind of make some kind of split between everything that just displays HTML or the layout and everything that actually can have user interaction. I thought I had to split all of these out, but luckily that's not the case. We can just continue as we were doing. I hope I answered some of your questions. I hope some of the confusion is now gone. If you still have questions, don't hesitate. I'm more than happy to answer those in the comment section below. All that said, I would highly recommend just to wait with upgrading to .NET 8 because it's not that stable yet. Things are changing still. There are some bugs. Some bugs are just resolved by cleaning and rebuilding. Some bugs are being reported and so on. Some bugs are from migrating to .NET 7 to .NET 8, and some are from .NET 6 to .NET 8. Some are even from .NET RC1 to .NET RC2. So just if you're in a stable environment, .NET 6 or 7, just wait for the official .NET 8. And don't worry too much about upgrading. I did make some videos by now about upgrading Blazor to .NET 8 and even the changes from RC1 to RC2, so with the interactive modes. So I hope that helps when the time comes for you, but I would really recommend just wait for the .NET 8 official version. If this video did help you, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and you may even go to kisco.com and share a positive experience. Entirely optional. I hope I see you in the next one.